Welcome to Series 5 of Goodnight, Sweetheart. Right, the reason I was asked to do the part of Noel Coward in Goodnight Sweetheart, it came about because I was doing my show about Kenneth Williams. And I did a one-man show, which I still perform, about Kenneth Williams, which I performed originally in Edinburgh in 1996, and I did it again in 1997 at the Assembly Rooms, which was one of the nicest, biggest, poshest venues in Edinburgh. I was very lucky to be there. I did the show, came out on a high afterwards, and a very tall, stunning-looking German lady came up to me and handed me a card and said, "My husband would like to talk to you. You may have heard of Lawrence Marks and Maurice Gran. Well, my husband is Lawrence Marks, and I think they'd like to do some work with you in the future." And I thought, this can't be true, because I'd never been on television in my life, and it was the sort of thing that happens in Hollywood movies, you know, when you go on stage and your heart is breaking and the audience loves you, and it turns out there's two producers in the audience who then take you out for dinner and blow cigar smoke in your face and tell you you're wonderful and say, "We're going to make you a star, kid." And so I just went with the flow, and indeed Lawrence and Maurice asked me for dinner that night, and they said, "Well, we've got this series called Goodnight Sweetheart. We're just working on the fifth series now." And I pretended I knew all about it. In fact, I'd never seen an episode of it in my life. But I said, "Well, it sounds very nice." And I honestly didn't expect anything to happen. I thought I'd never hear anything more about it. You learn as an actor not to raise your expectations too much, because otherwise you're going to be continually disappointed, because things tend not to happen, projects tend to fizzle out. So anyway, I waited, and a few weeks later I had a call from a casting agent who was doing all the casting for the series, and they asked me along to a meeting where I met the producer and the director, which is John Bartlett and Terry Kinane, and they really were just rubber-stamping it, because Lawrence and Maurice had already decided that they wanted me to do the part. I didn't know what the part was at the time, but they said they wanted to play Noel Coward, which was fantastic, because I'd always loved Noel Coward. Since I was about 12 or 13, my granddad, who was he was a headmaster, but he loved the theatre and performing, and he had these old 78 shellac Bakelite records of Noel Coward, and there was one of the Stately Homes of England, wonderful song, and I'd never heard Noel Coward before, but I instantly just loved it, and I ruined my dad's Bang & Olufsen stereo system playing those old 78 records on them, and I knew all the words, you know, the Stately Homes of England, or rather in the Lodge, it was wonderful. So I knew all these songs, and I started buying Noel Coward's records and researching about him, and read everything I could about Noel Coward, and I got to know him very well as a character, really. And so when they asked me to play the part of Noel Coward, I thought, well, this is it. This is a gift for me, really. Everyone was extremely nice. I mean, they all knew who I was, that I was doing a show about Kenneth Williams. And of course, at this time, when I was doing this first series of Goodnight Sweetheart, it was on the cards that I was going to do a West End run of my show about Kenneth Williams, which did actually happen in the end, a few weeks later. So I had that kind of cachet, I suppose. You know, people were kind of curious about this fringe actor who was coming in to do Noel Coward. You know, there was a certain amount of curiosity. By the way, I should say as well that the Lawrence and Maurice, I think one of the reasons they cast me in the show was that they were trying to broaden it a bit and bring in some new people. There were one or two actors, you know, who they'd seen in Edinburgh, more fringy kind of actors like me, not experienced television people. And I think they felt that it would just spice things up a bit, and just a bit of new blood was required at this point in the series' run. So I was very much came in on that wave, fortunately for me. Anyway, so the first thing that happened on the first day, after everybody had finished their teas and coffees, and we all sit around the table with the writers, Lawrence and Maurice, and the various other technical people working on the show, the director and the producer, and all the cast, and you sit and you just read the script. Now, this was, again, a completely new thing for me. I'd never done anything like this before. You sit around and you read the script, and I was listening very carefully all the time, trying to pick up any clues or tips I could of how real professionals did it. And my inclination was to give a full-on performance when doing the reading, but I noticed immediately that Nicholas Lyndhurst read his script in an extremely undemonstrative kind of way. He was very quiet. You could hardly hear him, actually. He just would, with no attempt to put any inflection. He still got his laughs. Everybody roared with laughter, but then, of course, they always do when you're reading a script for the first time. There's a kind of laughter that's a little bit too loud, a little bit too vociferous, perhaps because there's a lot of hope tied up in it. Everyone's really hoping that these lines really are as funny as they seem to be at the first reading. Anyway, so we just read through the script slowly, and people, you know, make little notes, and occasionally they were saying, well, someone would say, we'll take that line out there, and blah, 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 and so we say, right, cross it out. And then it got to my bit, which was, as I recall, right at the end of that episode, it's a scene where Gary meets Noel Coward in the lobby of the apartment building where they live. And I just did my lines as best I could with the Noel Coward voice, which is sort of like that, you know, and blah, 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 you know, blah, 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 sort of rather, I don't know where it comes from, but it's a sort of slightly airy quality to the voice, you know. But except, of course, everybody knows that Noel Coward talked like that.
We are negotiating purchase of a pied-à-terre on the first floor. Oh, buying the traitor's flat, eh? Well, until the managing agency confirms it in writing...
You can't make us stay outside in a raid, it's inhuman.
Look, love, people like these pay their service charge for a shelter where they do not have to mix with the hoi polloi.
Now, George, that is terribly, terribly unpatriotic. We must all pull together as if we were rowing in the boat race, where each must play his part, whether he's a hulking, muscular stroke or a small yet sinewy cox.
Sorry, Mr. Coward, I'm just trying to do my job. Well, of course you were, dear boy. But only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in a midday rain.
You recognise me. How frightfully deceptive.
And I was absolutely terrified that I would mess up these lines. And to me, I just felt that would be the worst thing I could do. To go into a studio with an audience watching, and with cameras everywhere and lights and all that money that it would be costing, and then to forget my lines, and so that I had to stop and do it again. You know, I just thought it would be so unprofessional. I can't possibly do that. So I sweated conkers, just going over and over and over these lines. And of course, the more you go over them, and the more you convince yourself that you might forget the line, the more you do forget the line. So all through the first week of rehearsal, I couldn't get the words out at all. They would just come out all tangled up, and I just would go away and go, I've got to crack this, I've got to crack it. I had to wait behind a flat, a bit of scenery, up at the top of a flight of stairs, and I heard them doing all these lines down on the floor. Nicholas and Liz and Richard Sims, who was playing the concierge, were doing these lines, and then on a cue, I had to light a cigarette and come down the stairs and begin to do the dialogue. And I think we did it in a couple of takes, actually. The first take was ruined because there was a bit where I was looking at Gary, and I wanted to exhale smoke in a way that suggested it was love at first sight. Quite a difficult thing to pull off. I'm not sure. You'll be able to judge for yourselves whether this actually works. But, you know, sometimes you can get a bit above yourself. You can get a bit too detailed. And, well, the audience might pick up on it subconsciously, but anyway. But unfortunately, the first time I did it, my face was completely obscured in a great wreath of smoke, so they had to stop and do another take, get the smoke right. But I did it, and everybody seemed to think it was great, and that was it. And I went away from that feeling enormously relieved. But, of course, you see, I was very lucky, because whereas they all then had to get ready for the rest of the day's work, which culminated in the audience coming in and them actually filming it in front live with the live scenes in front of this audience, I could actually relax. They actually said, you can go home now if you want. And I said, no, you must be joking. I didn't want to miss a thing. So I stayed, I watched all the rest of the rehearsals, and then when the actual filming started, I was running around the whole place. I'd go up the gallery, up to there's a gallery going all the way around the top of the studio, and you can watch and look down on the audience and see them down on the stage there filming it. And I was allowed in. Terry Kinane, the director, actually allowed me to come in and sit in the booth and watch them doing all the vision mixing, as they call it, where they're changing from different shots. And I felt all the time like I was going to be thrown out as an intruder, but I was one of the team, and I was allowed to stay and watch it all happen. And I loved it. It was just so fascinating to me, and I couldn't wait to get back for the next week. For me, it was very daunting prospect to come in to work with a lot of extremely experienced actors, and particularly Nicholas Lyndhurst. It was nice to be coming in on a show that was extremely well established and had a huge following, and it was astonished me to, when I read the viewing figures a couple of weeks later, to see that the first episode I was in got about 8 million, and I think it went up again as the series went on. It actually increased. 8 million people, and that is more, even in a short scene that I was doing at the end of the first episode, I was seen by more people doing that scene that I will be in a lifetime of touring my one-man shows. So it's a very strange thing, and it goes on television. And by the way, it actually was broadcast. That first episode was broadcast the night I made my debut in the West End. The two things happened the same night. And it was weird to think that millions and millions of people all over the country were watching me on television. I still can't quite... You can't even think about it while you're doing it, because you just wouldn't be able to speak, I don't think, on camera. Anyway, I was thrilled to meet Nicholas Lyndhurst, even though I had not particularly seen much of his work, really. He wasn't one of my favourite actors, but he was very, very nice. And he was very candid and honest with me as well about how he approached and how he felt about doing this work. Because I said to him, I remember after one of the dress rehearsals in the... on the first performance, I said to him, are you nervous? Because we were eating. You have a meal before the audience come in, and we were eating liver and onions and stuff like that. And I said, do you still get nervous? And he said, oh, yes, terribly. He said, I've never found a way of getting over that after all these years. I still feel that it's like a first night every week. You've worked on it all week, but you're still searching for the line somewhere, and you don't know whether the things you think are funny are going to get laughs. So you're feeling your way through it. You're listening to the audience, and you're having to really just... It's like a first night. There's all the tension and anxiety and relief, when it goes well, that comes with the first night. I'm going to let you into a secret on this bonus feature, which is that I wasn't a fan of his. I didn't like him much on television. It often happens. You see people on television, you think, oh, not them again. And then you meet them in real life, and they're really, really nice, and you have to completely revise your opinion of them. And I remember walking up to... I was introduced to him by... John Bartlett, the producer, and he said, Nicholas Lyndhurst, David Benson, and I said, oh, hello, Mr. Lyndhurst, and he said, oh, no, call me Nick, please, I just thought I should be formal to begin with. I didn't want to presume too much, that he might think I was being cheeky. I was terribly self-conscious, But he was very nice. He said he'd heard about my Kenneth Williams show, and he was charming, and in fact, everybody there, even though they were real television professionals, they didn't at all make me feel like an outsider. They welcomed me in, and I was immediately one of the team, which I thought was wonderful, and really showed great generosity, and I don't know, I just felt very much at home with him at once. I think Goodnight Sweetheart had a unique appeal to the public, because really it appealed to so many different age ranges. Nowadays you do find that a lot of situation comedy tends to be pitched at the youth generation, the coming home drunk from the pub generation, whatever. There's very few sitcoms that are pitched at an older audience. And, of course, what Goodnight Sweetheart did so well was to capture the younger audience, too. There was all that lovely stuff, the nostalgia side of it, for the older people. And as I say, the set designers and set dressers went to great lengths to find, the right kind of Grady Browning packet or whatever to put on the shelves of Gary's shop or in the scene set in the 1940s. But then you had that very modern, technologically advanced world as well, with Yvonne doing video links to her colleagues, from her living room, that kind of thing, which actually in '98 was slightly advanced of what was happening. But I think that's partly its appeal, the fact that it is respectful and to both eras. And of course, what really holds it together is Nicholas Lyndhurst, because he is able to assume that he's able to walk into the world of the 1940s, but he's so familiar from Only Fools and Horses and things like that, that he's immediately... The audience knows him at once. They know who he is, and they know his style, and so I think the whole thing just coalesces around him, and it just has huge potential for a very wide audience. I found generally that the cast members, even though they're extremely experienced and had been in the series for a long time, were very, very nice to me, and they gave me lots of good advice. And I remember sitting down talking to lovely Christopher Ettridge, who was another one of my real allies on the show. And he sat me down and I was asking him about timing. How do you time your laughs with a studio audience? And, you know, actually the advice he gave me was very obvious. He just said, well, you play to the laughs that you're getting. You don't really know where they're going to come until the audience are there laughing. And it's a strange thing, I should also say, that when you are doing a scene on with the studio audience, it's very different from doing it in the theatre because you can't see them. In a theatre, you know exactly what the parameters of the stage are, and the audience are there, and they're always going to be there. When you're recording on these in the studio, all the different sets for all the different rooms are all laid out on the studio floor, and sometimes the audience can see you straight on, and sometimes you're way over there somewhere, and they actually can't see you apart from on the little monitors, and you can't see them. So you're doing the scene, you're looking at the other actor in the eye and talking to them, and you hear this strange, a sort of distant laughing, gurgling noise coming from somewhere. And so you're talking to Nicholas Lyndhurst or Liz Carling or whoever, and you hear this strange noise, and you're having to listen to that and react to it and pause. And Chris also said to me, he said, it's much better, he said, to pause at the end of a line, even if there isn't a laugh from the studio audience, than to talk over a laugh, because they can't edit that. And he said, you must think about the editing. All these different things you have to think about. He said, you think about the editing, just pause a bit, and they can always tinker with it later. You know, if they can tighten the edit, they can make a little cut, or they can boost the laugh a bit. They can do all these things. So he said, you know, that was one of the key things that I learned, and very, very useful to be told these things by a real professional. Of course, Christopher and I worked, there was one episode, I think it was in I can't remember whether it was, I think it was in the next series, where we had to do a big dance routine, a tango. And we rehearsed that thing to death. I mean, we went over and over. I was terrified of doing that because I'm not really a dancer, and neither is he. He was wearing a wig. There was a whole scene where he had a wig on. We were doing a tango. And it actually ended up looking rather good on the screen. I was pleased. But we drilled and drilled that dance routine until it was just so. And he was lovely to work with. And again, like Nicholas Lyndhurst, very nice guy, very professional. In other words, did his job and then went home, and there was no nonsense. It was a great thrill for me to meet Lawrence and Morris, Marks and Gran, because I knew exactly who they were. When Lawrence's wife, Bridget, gave me that little card and said, Lawrence Marks, hello, well, here we go. This is it. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for. And they took me out for dinner that night in Edinburgh at the festival, and were very, very nice. Lawrence just kept asking me all the time to do Kenneth Williams voices. And he would say, so what would Kenneth do if he was Big Cigar, you know? What would he do? Go and do the voice where he's goes from posh to common. I said, right, okay. It was like, here, it's where I'm here. So I would just keep doing it, you know, and then he would get somebody over. Listen to this, listen to this. And I felt a bit like a performing monkey, but I thought, well, fair enough. If that's what they want, I'll do it. And I was delighted, really. And they were very nice. I noticed that Lawrence was the one who tended to have the ideas, and Morris would fire in the one-liners. He was constantly thinking of a new one-liner to throw in. All the time, and he'd say, you could say this, da-da-da-da, and, you know, he was always, the fact that both of them were constantly writing, really, even when they were having a conversation with you. And they were very, very intrigued by the whole Kenneth Williams character, and all the double entendres. They loved all that. And, of course, don't forget, one of the first job Lawrence and Morris ever had was writing for Frankie Howerd, because Frankie Howerd did a radio series called the Frankie Howerd Variety Show in 1978, and they wrote the opening and closing spot for Frankie Howerd, his opening and closing monologue for this radio show, and actually Lawrence presented me with a copy of the scripts that they wrote for him, which was wonderful for me, because I was doing a lot of research into Frankie at the time. Anyway, they were very nice. They loved it whenever I did a bit of Kenneth Williams vocalising, and in rehearsals, if I felt I needed a bit of attention, I would always just throw in a bit of Kenneth in. It would always make everybody laugh. It just works for some reason. And I remember there was one in the second show, I think, of the series that I was in. There was a line that as soon as I read it, I thought, that screams for Kenneth. And it's the line where he says, oh, Gary, I didn't know you were so enormously endowed. That was it. And so when we got to the first day of the rehearsals for that show, and we did the read-through, I was sitting next to Lawrence and Morris, and I said, there's a line here that really should, it's really, Kenneth would have loved this line. And Lawrence said, oh yeah, what was it? What's the line? I said, oh, wait, I'll tell you when we get to it. And, no, he said, no, come on, tell me, what was it? Come on, tell me what it was. And Morris said, that means tell us. And I said, and I went, oh. So when we got to the bit in the read-through, instead of going, Gary, I didn't know it was so enormously endowed, I said, Gary, I had no idea it was so enormously endowed, which actually did bring the house down. It was wonderful, you know, because everybody loves hearing Kenneth Williams' voice. And they were very amused by that. They loved all that sort of camp stuff. And they were extremely nice to me. They did bring me back to do 2 more episodes at the end of the series, and then they brought me back for 2 in the next series as well. And I am enormously grateful to them, because it's very rare for us fringe performers that somebody as high and mighty as them actually takes a chance and says, you know, we'll give you an opportunity to really play in the big time. No. I think some of the story strands that I really enjoyed. I love the whole bit with Phoebe becoming a singer and Noel giving her singing lessons. And there was one episode, there were a couple of episodes, which actually there were scenes I wasn't involved in. There's the one where he keeps waking up and it's a nightmare. He has a series of unfolding nightmares, and you're never sure when the dream is over or the nightmare is over, because he's constantly waking up from another one. That I thought was brilliant, very cleverly written episode. And I loved the one where he met his son. I thought that was so beautifully done, where Ian Lavender, which of course was a thrill to me to meet Ian Lavender as well. I mean, having grown up with Dad's Army, I'm obsessed with Dad's Army. I love it. And to meet him, and charming again, another very professional actor, sat doing crossword puzzles during the rehearsals, would then get up, do his scene, and go back to his crossword puzzle, you know.
Michael Sparrow.
Yeah.
That's your name, Michael Sparrow?
Yeah.
You're Michael Sparrow?
Is he a bit deaf?
No, he's a bit gobsmacked. Have you got any more of this stuff?
Well, there is more, yeah. Quite a bit more, but I didn't know whether you'd be interested.
Yes, I am. I am interested. I'll have to see you again, son. Someday. On Sunday. Or whenever's convenient.
What?
When?
You said Sunday.
No, tomorrow. Come tomorrow. About 7, okay?
Okay. Fiver?
Oh, your mum. Gary, you don't want to know.
What about my mum?
Is she still... She knows you're selling this stuff, does she?
Do you think I'd nick stuff off my own mother?
That was my son. My son, Michael. Michael Sparrow. My son. He's a big lad for a 2-year-old, isn't he?
The whole thing of Gary meeting his son as a down and out, and realizing that he has to go and change history, he has to go back and make it right so that his son will become a success, which is wonderful. It's such a touching thing, because any parent wants that for their child, wants them to be their best. And I suppose if any parent watching it, what they'd be thinking of was, suppose I could go forward in time and see how my children turn out, and is there anything I can do now to make sure that they get on the right path? I thought that was very profound, really. It was a lovely episode, even though I wasn't involved in the scenes where all that was happening. I was more peripheral in that one. Well, no. I'm always hoping that Goodnight Sweetheart will be brought back in some kind of a weird time warp. Someone will say, let's do Goodnight Sweetheart again, and I would be there in a shot. I would suggest that Noel Coward would be made the central character. In fact, I'd probably phase Gary Sparrow out altogether and just make it the Noel Coward show. But no, seriously, I would love to be in it again. It was a great experience for me, and I could play Noel Coward more realistically now, because I'm more the age that he should be during the wartime now. Even my hair is thinning as well, you know, so I could do it. And it would just be great to have that cast back again, you know, all those lovely people, and I would kill to do it again. It's appropriate that I did play Noel Coward in the 1940s, because if I could go myself back in time, I think that is the period, maybe a bit earlier, the 30s. A lot of the films and music that I love is from around about the time my dad was born, about 1935. I love Night at the Opera, Top Hat, you know, Oh, Mr. Porter, all these old films from that period, and the music of that time as well. And I've always thought that I was born in the wrong era. I should have been born around about the end of the First World War, and then I would have been really able to enjoy the 30s. Of course, then you would have to live through the 40s, which would have been a nightmare, and the 50s probably even worse. So, it's an era that I do love, and I felt very much at home playing that character in that time, because I just felt like I understood. I've been much more happy playing Noel Coward in the 1940s than I would have been playing a modern character in that show. I went to a Birmingham Comprehensive School in the 1970s, Park Comprehensive, in case there's anybody watching who knows it. And I then went to London University, and then went to live in Edinburgh for many, many years, where I wasn't acting. I worked in a bookshop, I washed dishes, I was an artist model, I did all sorts of things. And I really was dreaming, longing to become an actor. But I was, in a way, sheltering the lay-by of life, watching the traffic roar by until I felt strong enough and confident enough to join them myself. And it took me a long time. I didn't really start acting, even on the fringe, until I was about 28, 29. And then did my own show. I decided to create my own work when I was about 34, and that was when I first did my Kenneth Williams show. And I've been doing my own work ever since. Plus, anything else I'm asked to do, stage work and television very occasionally. But mostly I am a one-man band, really. And, yeah, cut before I get to it. And, Jackanory, yeah. Well, I suppose my first taste of national exposure, as it were, was when I was 13 years old, and I entered a competition called the Jackanory Story Writing Competition. This wasn't the regular Jackanory. This was a special week. You were allowed to write a story and send it in. And so I sat down and wrote a story, because I thought this is my golden opportunity, because I had, all my schoolwork was full of silly jokes. I was obsessed with Spike Milligan and The Goon Show, and I had been for many years, and all my work was full of Milligan-esque jokes. My chemistry homework had Milligan-esque jokes in it. I was always in terrible trouble at school. So when this competition was announced, I thought, well, this is a golden opportunity for me now to use my gift, my love of comedy, and put it into the right context. So I wrote a story called The Rag and Bone Man, which you can still read and hear on my website, www.davidbenson.info. And I wrote the story. It was based on a story that my father had read in The Guardian about a man who went into a junk shop and found a piece of old rubbish, which he paid 50 pence for, and which turned out to be worth a fortune. So I wrote a story called The Rag and Bone Man about the proprietor of a museum who buys an Egyptian mummy off the Rag and Bone Man for 50 pence. And blah, blah, blah. And it's a silly story full of Milligan-esque jokes. And it won. It was one of the winners. And there was a whole week of stories from all the entrants who won. And there would be 2 actors in the studio who do all the other stories. But every day there was a star spot, which was the story that was being read by Kenneth Williams. And they would cut from the studio to a piece of film with Kenneth in the back of a Rolls-Royce, and he would pick up the phone and say, yes, yes, the Rag and Bone Man, yes, right, and then he'd get out the car and read the story, and hold up pictures that I had done myself and sent in. And it was broadcast on television on December the 10th, 1975, and of course everybody at school watched it, and it took me years to live it down. I mean, I was hounded at school by yobs coming up to me going, oh, Ducky, because I was now associated with the campus man in England, Kenneth Williams. I mean, I wanted Spike Milligan to read the story. I was furious when I got this letter from Daphne Jones, the producer of Jackanory, saying your story will be read by Kenneth Williams. I wanted Milligan or Peter Sellers, or even Harry Seacombe at a pinch would have been all right, and I thought, no, not Kenneth Williams. And so I was incredibly embarrassed by that. But, you know, of course, years later, I actually started to think, hang on, this was a wonderful thing to have happened, and I wish there was still film. That little strip of film still existed, but the search has been endlessly done in the BBC archives, and there's nothing left. The only thing left is a recording I made by holding up a tape recorder to the television set. And one of those old portable tape recorders, because we didn't have videos in 1975, let alone DVDs. And, you know, I just held up this thing, and I still have the tape, and that's really all that's left of it, but it's a precious thing. It's one of the most precious things I possess, that tape. Well, my one-man show about Kenneth Williams isn't based on the diaries. I used his diaries as an inspiration, and they're wonderful because they give you a glimpse of who he was when he wasn't performing, when he went home. I was very interested in the fact that, you know, he would give a great performance on, say, Just a Minute, and be outrageous and was, oh, I've never been so poorly treated. I've come all the way from Great Portland Street, you know. It's absolutely outrageous the way they treat me. It's absolutely dreadful. And then he would go home and write in his diary and say, I was really dreadfully behaved on Just a Minute. I was shouting and bawling and making a fool of myself. And of course they were all laughing sycophantically. I felt suicidal afterwards. And I was fascinated by that, and I thought that's the key to him, is that middle ground between the outrageous performer and the suicidal man at home. And I tried to suggest that. Later on, I did do a radio series, 3-part series for BBC Radio, which is now available as a CD, called The Private World of Kenneth Williams, which is me reading from his diaries, plus extracts of him in performance. And we always tried to, when choosing the clips, we tried to find clips that gave the lie to his very pessimistic view of how a particular performance had gone. So you hear him saying, oh, it was awful, and then you hear it, and it's hilarious. And that was something that I really enjoyed doing. It was very hard work to try and condense the diaries, a lifetime of diaries, into 3 half-hour programs, or 2 one-hour CDs as they are now. But you know, the whole sweep of his life is in those diaries, and of course they're terribly gossipy as well, which makes them extremely entertaining to us to read now. In the early days, when I was first doing my Kenneth Williams show, I actually found it irksome that I became known as that man who does Kenneth Williams. I only ever did a show about Kenneth Williams because I wanted to do a show about something, and I could do the voice. And I thought, well, nobody's done a show about Kenneth Williams, I'll do that. But I never intended to become a lifelong Kenneth Williams impersonator, really, because, you know, obviously I don't look like Kenneth Williams. On stage, it works. I can give the audience this illusion that they are actually watching Kenneth Williams, even though I don't have his hair, I don't have his looks or anything like that, but it works on stage. It's a mystical, strange process. But as time has gone by, and I am occasionally asked to do a voiceover or a program about Kenneth Williams to talk about him, and so I've given up caring too much about people thinking, oh, there he is again doing his Kenneth Williams, which is what I thought people would be saying. Because I realise people do like to hear him. They like to hear about him, they like to hear the voice, and they enjoy it, so why not do it? As long as I can keep on doing other things as well, I don't mind at all. I found the diaries a very depressing read, because they are so relentlessly downbeat. You wonder when he's going to ever get the point about his life, and realise that the way it is the way it's going to be, that he's not going to ever look different, he's not going to be heterosexual, he's got the career he's got, and it's actually a very successful one, so why does he need to keep complaining about it all the time? And you just think, oh, just get over it, just enjoy your life. And that's something that I try to put over in my Kenneth Williams, my own performance as him. I turn into myself and tell him off at one point and say, stop whinging, your life isn't actually that bad. But I think he was almost in love with the idea of having a miserable life. You know, he actually started to enjoy being a miserable sod, you know. It was easier to just keep on doing that than to actually really overcome his problems. So it's a very frustrating and difficult read at times. I did my last work on Goodnight Sweetheart was the 6th series, which was we filmed in 1999. I can't remember what month, but since then, I mean, actually, funny enough, 2 years after doing Goodnight Sweetheart, I was working in an office. Can you believe it? I didn't have any work. I'd been trying to write a book, which didn't really come off. And in that time, I had run out of money, so I had to pay my rent. I was living in London, and I thought, what am I going to do? I had to go and work in an office. Nobody recognised me, I have to say. Nobody said, oh, you're the one who played Noel Coward, aren't you? Which I was very disappointed about. But then I got back into, on the road, I wrote a new show in 2001, the one about Frankie Howard, and since then I've written 4 shows, so I've got 6 altogether at the moment, and I'm working on the 7th. And so I've been concentrating almost entirely on creating my own work and developing my own style, I suppose, as a performer, touring around the country, and really following the second oldest profession, that of the travelling performer. I pitch up in a town, do my show, and then I move on to the next town, and it's rather a nice life. I think the Kenneth Williams show that I do, Think No Evil of Us, is always going to be special. It's like your first child. It's a very... I still perform it regularly, and it's still a challenge, and it's still something that I enjoy doing, and that the audience is still extremely taken with, let's say, and I still get great reaction with it. Even though I look less and less like Kenneth Williams as I get older, it doesn't seem to matter. But so that's always very special. And if you're talking about what show do I enjoy doing most, I think anything, the latest thing I'm doing, I do believe in living in the moment. So whatever I'm working on at the moment is my favourite. But Goodnight Sweetheart, I'll always be extremely grateful for that opportunity. It was a unique thing, and for me to be asked to do a show where I was performing in front of 8 million people was really quite extraordinary for me and changed my life, really. For me, there's no real difference between comedy and more serious roles. They're always intertwined, and I think a lot of the actors that I like watching do both comedy and drama or tragedy even at the same time. A lot of film actors like James Cagney, who's always been a hero of mine, Spencer Tracy, people of that, Cary Grant, people of that calibre and era were adept at... I mean, people tend to think of Cagney as a tough guy, gangster, but all his performances are peppered with little comic touches, which I love. You know, I think they should be. I don't think the two things are separate. I think serious and comedy both go together. I think Nicholas Lyndhurst is actually a very good example of the kind of actor who can do both. I'd never even seen an episode of Only Fools and Horses, I must admit. I wasn't particularly interested. I saw about 5 minutes of one of the early episodes and thought, this isn't really my style, so I didn't watch it. But when we were rehearsing Goodnight Sweetheart, it was on. I turned on the television and there was Only Fools and Horses, so I actually watched it because I was working. I'd just been working with Nicholas. And there was a scene in the episode where he's stuck in a lift with David Jason, and he's talking about fatherhood or something like that. And I remember being extremely taken with it because it was a long speech that Nicholas had, which was actually quite emotional and wasn't at all a comedy moment. He was playing it for real, and it was very moving and very touching, and actually my respect immediately went right up. I thought, my God, this is the whole art, is to be able to make the audience laugh. I mean, because a very long, difficult speech with lots of emotion, punctured at the end with a good comedy line, which is classic British comedy, really. And he did that brilliantly. And that's really the kind of acting I like, where you're not sure whether it's supposed to be funny or not, or where you can blur the edges a bit and not make it too obviously comedic, but actually have some depth to it as well. At the moment, as we speak, which is in May 2006, I'm writing a new show for the Edinburgh Fringe in the summer, and this is something I'm actually doing it in August, and I haven't written a word of it yet, but it's going to be something a bit different. It's not going to be about any dead cat comedians or anything like that. It's just going to be me as myself. It's an experiment, really, to see if I can get away with doing an hour with David Benson. The show's called Why Pay More, and we'll see what happens. I'm also going to be doing a 10th anniversary run of my Kenneth Williams show. It's hard to believe this show's 10 years. I'm still performing it regularly. But we're going to call it a 10th anniversary run, you know. Make out it's something special, but it's just business as usual for me, really. That show's... I think I'll be doing it until I drop. And I'm writing a pantomime as well for theatre in Newbury, which I've been associated with for a couple of years. And then we're going to see what happens. I don't know. I like to think that maybe someone will buy this DVD and think, what a brilliant actor. Let's give him a part in our new series. Does that sound a bit desperate?
Good night, sweetheart.